In this lesson, I'm going to show you how in Photoshop we can use our more advanced selection tools to change the background. If you remember this photo, the end result of the Northern Lights just didn't look like it went so well together with the photo. Here I've done another version of it that I think looks a lot better, and let me walk you through those steps. In Photoshop, with our contextual taskbar open, we can simply click Select Subject, and it's actually going to do a better job selecting our subject. But from here, we can do an even better job. I'm going to take my quick selection tool. There's a little bit of area here that isn't looking so great, so I'm going to subtract that by taking this tool and pressing the Option key to subtract and go in there. Releasing the Option key so that we are getting his face, his shirt, and we'll do a little bit of the hair as well. We can even clean that up with some object selection in just a minute. Everything else is looking pretty good. I can see that the hair is going to be a little bit messed up there. So let's go in to with our selection tool selected, we can choose Select and Mask. And from here, we have all of the advanced options, such as clicking the Refine Hair button. That's going to refine the hair that we're seeing. It selects, I don't know if that's his finger right there. I'm just going to get rid of that. So we have our selection tool on. I'm going to subtract, and the keyboard shortcut for making our brush bigger or smaller or harder or softer is the Control Option key on a Mac. And I'm just going to make that right there. Get rid of that little selection right there. Everything here looks pretty good. I'm going to zoom in here, and the edge of his face. Whoops, I was on the subtract. I want to be on add. Just make sure the edge of his cheek is being selected. You can see that the hair there, it's selected, and it's a pretty good job, especially when we're zoomed out. All right, so that looks good. Now let's just click OK, and we still have that selection selected. So now what we're going to do is select the inverse of it, right? We have to select everything outside of this person. So what we're going to do is click Inverse, and now we're selecting everything outside. So you can, if I zoom out, you can see that I'm selecting the background, and now I can choose Generative Fill, Northern Lights. And you already see on the right-hand side, we have this generative layer that we'll be able to edit and do things too, rather than it all being tied together on the web app. So we can scroll through these and find the one that looks best that we want to work with. Let's just do one generate, more generate, and see. That one's actually pretty good. But you can see the lighting on their faces. It's so bright, it's so flat. Their whole face, their whole body is lit up properly. But if this was a flash shot at night, it just wouldn't look like this. That one looks pretty good. Oh, this one, it generated his arm behind. That is pretty good. Okay, so we're gonna work with this. So now what do we have to do to make this background look better? A couple things. First, we're going to deal with the lighting, some basic lighting. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new, let's do an exposure adjustment. So here what we can do, we have this adjustment layer, and we're just gonna bring down the exposure. And then we're going to brush off part of the image so that it's not so dark, obviously parts of their faces. So with our brush, or B on the keyboard shortcut, we can erase part of this layer mask. If this is confusing to you, you definitely need to check out my full Photoshop course, which goes over all of these tools. With black selected, I have my X key on my keyboard shortcut that changes the foreground and background color from black to white. Or if you don't have black or white, you can click on that box and pick white or black. We're going to erase part of this image. So we're going to erase part of their face, but I do like having like the back of their face, maybe even the back of her hand, or his hand rather, a little bit darker. We're trying to make it look like the flash kind of shone directly on them, but not so much on the background. So we're going to make that a little bit darker. We can drop our opacity as well to sort of blend this in a little bit better. And that's looking pretty good. want to keep their faces exposed properly. So that's the first thing that we can do. The next thing we can do is match the color of our foreground. So right now our foreground, which is this lowest layer, the color balance doesn't match the background. So we can go to new adjustment layer and we're going to choose, let's do color balance. And here in our property panels, we can select shadows, midtones, highlights. Let's do our midtones, and we're going to change our yellow to blue and make it a little bit more blue and just a tiny bit, hit more magenta. And we're going to go back down to our shadows and do the same. Now it's looking a little bit too cool, too magenta. So in our highlights, we're actually going to do the opposite just a little bit and make our yellows or our highlights a little bit more yellow to balance that out. Let's go ahead and do another adjustment, just a brightness and contrast adjustment. And again, it's applying to that background layer of just our subject. That's our selection. We're just gonna make it a touch more darker. We could have done this with the exposure layer as well. Now, another thing that doesn't look natural is the background is sharp in focus. Even though it's the northern lights, it kind of looks like it's in focus. So what we can do is we can either apply a blur to this layer, but because there's this foreground sort of like, it looks like a wall that they're leaning on, we're going to actually make a copy of this layer. And then we're going to apply our blur. So up to filter, blur. I like using the Gaussian blur. And here we can kind of adjust it and we can preview what it looks like. And that looks pretty good. And now what we're going to do is erase the parts that we don't want to be blurred. So with that layer mask selected, we can now, with our opacity up, blur out, or not blur, sharpen back this wall in the front. Parts of the edges of their hair are also part of this selection. So I'm going to bring that back up, sharpen it together, and we're looking pretty good. Now this background is a little bit different than this original one, but I think the actual overall look is looking a bit better. I might have made them and their faces a little bit too dark. So what I could do is either brighten it up again, or I can go in and brush out their faces so their faces aren't too dark. So from our original photo that I just placed on top to this one, you can see that the color adjustments, the blur, the exposure adjustments really help make this a realistic image. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in another lesson.